Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. How you doing this morning?
All right.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey.
Hmm.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Mark.
Morning. Good morning, Donovan.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thanks to everybody for making this work. I know busy work schedules and scheduling a special meeting is sometimes a challenge.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
I think there's a little feedback in the background for somebody.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right, looks like we have everyone here and it's 7 o'clock. So if we'll go ahead and get started. Roll call, please.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Brooks,
Here.
Mr. Cooper,
Here.
Mr. Homan, Mr. Stahl.
Here.
Okay.
Okay. Please join Mr. Cooper as he leads us in a moment of meditation and then with the pledge.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One
one
nation,
nation, under
under
God,
indivisible
indivisible, with liberty and justice
for
for
all.
all.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We're still getting some feedback from somebody out there. If you could put it on mute, except when you're going to talk, that might be helpful. Okay, everyone's had a chance to see this agenda for this meeting. Do I have a motion to adopt this agenda as presented?
Moved.
Mr. Cooper, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Brooks? There's no discussion. We'll go ahead and roll call, please.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Homan,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl.
Yes.
Okay, we'll move right into the primary topic of the meeting today, the superintendent's report. Dr. Kramer?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And again, thank you everybody for being able to make this special meeting. As I mentioned just before the onset of the meeting, I know it's a challenge with work schedules and things like that. So I greatly appreciate it. Mr. Shoemaker, I think you're on the call here. If you can enable some screen sharing for me, we can go over a quick presentation on our restart plan. Perfect, thank you. All right, everybody see my screen okay? Okay, well, First of all, some thank yous. Thank you to the board, in particular, Mr. Cooper, who's been able to sit on our restart committee that's met on a weekly basis, sometimes much more than a weekly basis. And then also to our administrators, a great number of staff members who have contributed as well, some who have sat on the task force, our Teachers Association, who we've met with every couple of weeks to receive some impact, parents who've completed surveys or otherwise provided some input. As you know, this is a particularly large decision and a large task in looking at how we're going to restart instruction for the fall, which is fastly approaching. But appreciate the input. That planning and that input will continue as we're about 6 weeks from the beginning of the school year. Incidentally, if you look at that first part of that slide, all of the information that I'm sharing with you today will be uploaded later this morning to our district website. So we had some guided principles when we sat down and look at trying to devise this restart plan. First and foremost was to meet educational, social, emotional, and physical needs of our students. Obviously, protecting the health and safety of our students, staff, and anybody visiting our schools was very much important and paramount. Also being efficient, adaptable, and cost-effective to run the district. Supporting our staff and parents, because we know that our school year is going to look different than it did, say, prior to March of this school year. And then obviously we wanted to include people as much as we possibly could into the planning process. When we looked at our restart, we wanted to make sure that we were adequately communicating the educational options that, quite frankly, were already available in the district. And some families were prior taking advantage of. And so we looked at trying to define those educational options and communicate those out very effectively to families. That process begins now and will continue. We are encouraging those families who have students who may have some chronic underlying medical issues to choose a blended approach and or a remote approach because of the uncertainty of the pandemic and all of the associated issues that come with this. So in defining those educational options for families, and like I said, these options were available in some shape and fashion prior to this year. And they fell into 3 boxes. One being daily campus instruction for students with additional health and wellness strategies. And we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly that looks like. We know that that is influenced greatly by the trends in disease rates in our county, and certainly in some of the aspects that we have to meet in regards to requirements from Madison County Public Health. London Unlimited has been in place in the district for 4 years. It's a blend of on-campus and remote instruction. This is targeted to 6 through 12. Think about those old Choose Your Own Adventure books. And so when we implemented this program, if you recall, we wanted to provide a great amount of opportunity and choice for families. And primarily, this was implemented in grades 9 through 12 before this, but families were able to choose if they would like to take a couple of classes on campus, for example, if they wanted to be involved in our FFA program, or if they wanted to be involved with, say, a science lab or another class, while also taking some classes remotely, they were able to do that. And as you recall, when we instituted London Unlimited, some students were able to take advantage of that. Some students came in to work with our highly qualified teachers immediately after school in order to complete the remote learning classes. And finally, Radar Remote. Radar Remote is an all virtual instructional option. It uses our school's PLP software We've had some software in place. The district has transitioned to PLP software over the last couple of months, which provides a large amount of curriculum to cover our classes. It's facilitated by highly qualified teachers. And notice that in the description, there is a note in order for us to align our resources effectively. Shortly after our board meeting this morning and in our process of communicating, we're going to ask families to opt in to London Unlimited or to Raider remote options. And we're going to give them until August 1st in order to complete that. We're going to build schedules regarding parent interest in what they would like to do for schooling for the fall. And then we're going to align some of our greatest resources, our teachers and our staff, in order to meet those needs. For example, if we have about 10% of families that are opting into Raider Remote, we will look at assigning teachers based on credentialing, based on some teacher interest, and based on obviously parent preference. We'll assign those teachers to help facilitate that program. As I mentioned, these programs have been around for a while, but I think it's important, especially as we approach the school year, to understand that our families have many different feelings about the start of the school year. I have certainly, as I'm sure you have heard from families who are very interested in going back to on-campus instruction as much as possible. And I've also heard very much from families who are concerned about that aspect. And so in defining these educational options, we want to make sure no matter what on-campus instruction looks like, families realize that they can have choices. And that could be all remote, or that can be a level of on-campus instruction that is dictated, as I mentioned, from our trends in disease rates here within the county and what we are required to do from Madison County Public Health. So in order to make some decisions regarding on-campus instruction, we realize that, as I mentioned a couple of times already, we're influenced by our trend in disease rates. And so we put together an educational decision matrix that we will employ during the school year, decision-making that I will make in consultation with all of you to determine which stage we may operate. And we want to be flexible enough that we can respond to trends as we've seen in this pandemic. We have seen infection rates drop and very positively get better. And in those cases, we can think of a less restricted and more students on campus. And we've also seen, especially emphasized by the governor last evening, where there are some more concerning trends sometimes. And if this is the case, then we can move, say, to less students on campus and a little bit different model. It is very much worth noting that we are not going to do this from a day-to-day basis. We do want to be flexible and adaptable to growing trends, and we will make every attempt to give families adequate notice when it becomes necessary to move between stages. So that decision matrix looks like this. And so working from left to right, say stage 1 would be all students, all days, all campuses. We put some supplemental blended instruction because every classroom will be very similar to the fourth quarter of this past school year, in that they will be set up with a Google Classroom in case we have to move through these stages, so that we can continue an effective continuity of instruction in case we have to transition. Stage 2 would be all the elementary students, all days on campus, again, with some blended instruction to ensure that we would have those capabilities. This stage would have all middle school and high school students, would be some form of blended or all remote instruction. Stage 2B, and they're very similar, would look at all students to have some form of blended instruction. If we would need to be more restrictive, we would look specifically at those things that are needed to be held on campus, things like science labs or other more project-based learning courses. And we would prioritize that instruction to be face-to-face here on campus. And finally, stage 4, if we as a county really look at disturbing trends in regards to disease rates, would move to all students online. At this present time, the anticipated opening and realizing that we are 6 weeks away from the beginning of the school year, it would be my recommendation that we start in stage 2A. This would be all London elementary students, all days on campus. And this would be middle school and high school students with blended instruction. The specifics of blended instruction for those middle school and high school students would be released at a later date during the first week of August. In making this recommendation, it balances some priorities of health and wellness with efforts to provide a high quality education. It focuses our resources day to day on one school. We'll talk about the restrictions that Madison County Public Health has asked all school districts in the county to meet. We want to ensure that we're able to do that effectively. I think in looking at a balanced approach here by bringing elementary students back, we can monitor how those strategies are being implemented, ensure that we are doing it correctly. This also prioritizes on-campus instruction for elementary students. As we know, it's very difficult to look at a remote learning structure for a first grade or a kindergarten classroom. And then finally, we understand that families have childcare concerns, and this assists our families in regards any of our working families in regards to childcare. Now, we mentioned some Madison County Public Health protective actions. These protective actions are a part of our plan. They're integrated into our restart plan. I've shared them certainly with all of you. We've discussed them ad nauseum with our task force and the other groups that we have met in order to look at these plans. And clearly, we are making plans in regards to personal protective equipment and many other aspects in order to meet this plan and open up effectively here in the coming weeks. I'm not going to go through all of the protective actions. I do think it's important to highlight a couple of them. One, the requirement from Madison County Public Health that all students, staff, and visitors wear a cloth mask while at school. You'll notice that I put in there some special considerations for students with documented medical issues. There's more to the guidance than just what I've summarized in this aspect, but I think it's important to highlight that protective action. The second one that I've highlighted here is distancing. We're all familiar with social distancing being at least 6 feet. There is an acknowledgement if you're going to bring students back to school that maintaining 6 feet is very much a challenge in our typical classrooms. But the spirit of looking at distancing is that we will make every attempt to ensure that there is adequate distance between members of different households. Positive cases, if a student or a staff member or an individual, quite frankly, visiting our school district, visits school, there would be a 14-day period that would be required for them to not be on campus. Notice I've included the word exposure in quotes there. The term exposure, as defined by the health department, means that any individual who has come into contact with someone who is positive for a cumulative time of about 15 minutes within 2 days of the onset of symptoms. So that's a lot to consider. but it emphasizes the need for the district to employ effective strategies in regards to distancing, the protective action I highlighted just before this one. And finally, I think it's important to understand testing. And so as part of our plan, we talked about the benefits or perhaps the drawbacks of implementing a testing program, at very least for our staff. There had been some debate about how useful that might be. For example, you could get a test and test negative and then come in contact with someone who had the disease in a relative short time after you received that test. We thought it was important to note that testing is available within our county to those who are interested in receiving it. And so we shared this as we shared the plan with all of our staff members yesterday, and would encourage any of those folks who feel the need to receive a COVID-19 test that we can direct them to some resources here locally where they can receive that test. So as I mentioned, a couple of points of emphasis. There are 39 days, if my counting is correct, between today and the beginning of the school year. There's a lot that can happen, as emphasized again by the governor last night. I'm suggesting that we start with all of our elementary students on campus every day, and a mix for our middle school and high school for the reasons that I highlighted previously. In 6 weeks, our trends here in the county could look much different, and I may be coming back to you and letting you know that we may start in a different stage. I think it's really important for us to share with our community what our thinking is right now so that folks can make plans. In particular, our families can think about childcare and some other things. So I do think it's important for us to share that plan of elementary all day, every day, and a mix between middle school and high school. And it is, we do have an urgency to finalize those plans and get the specifics of what middle school and high school would look like and communicate those out the first week of August. Other points of emphasis, again, I've mentioned options. Families are encouraged to make educational decisions which best match their comfort and circumstance for the coming year. We don't want parents to be placed in an uncomfortable situation. So if they're uncomfortable with their child being on campus for any aspect, then they certainly have an option to receive schooling remotely. And as I mentioned, shortly after our board meeting this morning, we will put out opt-in forms for families, and we'll communicate that through all manner of district communications. Staff assignments are going to be dependent. So once we get that information back, we're going to align our resources as much as we possibly can. We're concerned with the health and safety of our students, of course, but our restart plan, any of our plans to include instruction on campus, is dependent on our staff staying available and healthy. And so we'll make every effort to match staff assignments with those staff members who feel as though who may be compromised from an immune standpoint or have a distinct situation or an interest in teaching remotely as well. Extracurriculars, we're going to continue to follow the guidance from Restart Ohio. We've submitted our athletic facility use plan for the summer, as you know. Incidentally, the implementation of that plan, which has now gone on for about 7 weeks, has been very positive. And that is, again, a tribute to Mr. Wolverton, Mr. Helmkamp, all of our coaches, our students and our families who are doing their due diligence to implement that plan. And finally, communications. Our plan all along, one of the first pages in the Restart plan is a communication guidelines, and we've been sending out updates every 2 weeks. We're going to continue to do that through all manner of district communications, including pushing notifications through our app, automated phone calls, emails, social media, and through our district website. Just another point of emphasis, one of the aspects of our point of portrait of a graduate is being flexible and adaptable. So district graduates explore and approach new situations with an open mind and curiosity. They persevere through challenges and setbacks in school and life. I can't think of a more poignant aspect to emphasize here for our students, for our staff, for all of our leadership, for our community as well, that we're flexible and adaptable, and we try to keep our priorities at the forefront. Obviously, the presentation did not include every aspect of the restart plan. We will, as I mentioned, update that on our district website. Obviously, the Board of Education has those details currently as we push to adopt. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any board members, we certainly can have a discussion over the restart plan. I know you're familiar with it, and I appreciate your input as we've gone through the planning process, but be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. Do I have a motion to consider business recommendations 5.1 through 5.2?
So moved.
Mr. Cooper, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Brooks? Discussion, comments? I'd just like to thank you, Dr. Kramer, along with everyone who's participated in putting this plan together. It's certainly a very fluid situation for the nation as a whole, but as a district trying to come together, do what's best for the community while addressing the individual of all of our families and our students is not an easy task. And as you indicated, we're 6 weeks away from the start of the school year. And while that seems very close in today's world, that's an eternity. So the flexibility that you and the team has come up with, I think, provides our community, our families, our students with the best way to address this situation. So I know it's been an arduous task, and again, one that we'll have to remain fluid on and as we move forward. But all the work and effort that's gone into that, I want to recognize all of you for that, and then also ask for the grace, to use that word, of folks as we're entering into this, because there will be some hiccups, there will be some issues regardless of what path we take. But I think working hand in hand with the public health officials in order to provide the best opportunity for a safe restart, it's what you presented here to us. So those are my comments regarding the restart plan.
Well, Mr. Brown, I appreciate that. I do appreciate the board. Clearly, you've provided a lot of guidance as we've gone through this process, and I appreciate the priorities of keeping the health and safety of our students and our staff and any visitors to our school as paramount, but also trying to move us to being able to offer some great educational options for our families too. We know that we would all prefer some normalcy and all students back on campus every day. And so it's tough on both sides to make a recommendation to you that not all students would be coming back. At least this is our snapshot here on July 16th. In the same respect, I certainly take the responsibility in making that recommendation seriously, and we'll continue as an admin team, and certainly we'll have discussions here as with the board as well as to the appropriateness of each stage as we go through the school year. I think we all hope that in a month we can perhaps look at something less restrictive and make a different recommendation, or say in 2 months to 3 months and continually reevaluate. I think that's an important thing to think about is while we don't want to change day to day and disrupt people's lives, we also want to be able to be flexible enough to, if it is more appropriate to bring more students back to campus, we want to be able to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding the restart plan? If not, Dr. Kramer, do you have any comments regarding the district academic calendar?
No, sir. Well, yes, sir. That is to say, the district academic calendar, we have made a move to move that to the following Monday. We normally open up on a Wednesday and have 2 days of professional development. I'm asking the board for us to have 3 additional days to transition to our new realities here to certainly learn more about the health and safety restrictions and the new procedures that we'll be putting in place, but also looking at some professional development to support as we move along here and if we have to transition between stages.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, or concerns regarding business recommendations 5.1 through 5.2? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Brooks,
Yes.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Homan,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes. Right. We'll move on to personnel recommendations 5.3 through 5.5. Do I have a motion to consider and approve those recommendations?
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Stahl, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Homan, discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Just 3 more recommendations, and this completes our official hiring for the school year. I'm very pleased to do that and very pleased with the individuals that we've been able to bring on board to the district. As I did mention to the board, and I think it's worth noting, we do have some concerns with substitutes, and while they wouldn't be formal recommendations for hire in what you're seeing right now, our next task would be looking at securing some substitutes, both in certified and classified, to ensure that operationally, if we have individuals, staff members that are out, we're able to plug folks in and we're able to implement the plan that I just shared with you and you just approved.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding personnel recommendations 5.3 through 5.5? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Homan,
Yes.
Mr. Stahl,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Brooks.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. I believe that's the last item on our agenda. We have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you all. Appreciate the flexibility for this meeting, and we'll see you shortly. Thanks.
Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.